tornado before, okay? And I don't know how to react, and I don't know what to do, you know what I mean? Because I'm never part of that. Like, this is what happened. When I was just in Louisville, a tornado hit Churchill Downs, where they run the horses, okay? Blew the roofs off the stables and threw horses across the fucking street. And I was there, and I'm like, I don't want to be here.
This is Plausibly Live.
Well, good morning, good evening, or good afternoon, wherever you are, whatever you do. A lot of things happening in the world today, most of them far beyond our control, you might say. So perhaps it's time we took a pause and thought about life and thought about the laws of gravity, tornadoes, the Adams rule, politics, and or the news. Don't touch that dial. Just try to hear me out for a little while. Well, I had another show ready and written. I talked about the other day. I feel like there's a lot of stuff going on in Ukraine that I wanted to get into. But something happened last night around 7 o'clock my time that, boy, it just makes me nervous. I mean, I don't really know how to explain this. So, I'm from Oklahoma. Most of you know this. I grew up in Colorado and in Utah. And most of my life I have spent away from the tornado belt, tornado alley in this country. I have seen some tornadoes. I've been in a couple of tornadoes in Oklahoma. It wasn't something that I was terrified of, but neither was it close enough to me to really get interesting in any way, shape, or form. The one I really remember was we were coming back from Blanchard to Oklahoma City to my grandparents' house, and there was a tornado right around Moore, south of Oklahoma City, and the rain was coming down so hard you couldn't see. I mean, literally couldn't see. And so Dad had to park underneath a bridge, a highway overpass, and wait out the storm. And that was, for me, that was really close. I was probably 10 or 11 when that happened. For the most part, during my times in Oklahoma, tornadoes were kind of thing. My grandparents had a storm cellar in their house that we used to want to play in it. Grandpa would never let us because it was for emergencies. And so I went in there once. It was dark, dank, and basically just a cave underneath the house. And I'm not sure how that would have helped, but there you go. Lived in Georgia for many years, and of course we had tornadoes all the time. But there's an old joke about tornadoes that seems to be kind of true, which is they seem to, for whatever reason, hit trailer parks. I don't know why. And that seemed to be my experience in Georgia, and they never really got close to where I lived. We did have a hurricane go through Atlanta one time when I lived there. I'm not making this up. Hurricane Opal. And I slept through the whole thing. Never heard it. So, but tornadoes are one of those things that really make me nervous, I guess. And last night, about 7 o'clock our time, that would be 9 o'clock Oklahoma City time, a tornado went through my parents' neighborhood, my sister's house. My parents live with her. Well, my mother does. And the tornado went right through their neighborhood. As of right now, there is no visible damage or anything like that. No injuries, so everything is kind of cool. But I've got dozens of texts from my sister last night about things like, how do I get the cat to come inside? How do I where's the safest place? What do we do? Where are we going? How do we get Mom to her doctor's appointment this morning because all the roads are closed because of debris everywhere. It's a little nerve-wracking. I was kind of joking with her when she started. I said, your tornado. I live 75 miles from the most dangerous mountain in America, not the one behind me. The one behind me is Mount Constance. Mount Constance on that side, Mount Jupiter on the other side. Anyway, those are in the Olympics, which are definitely not volcanic. But on the other side of me, 75 miles kind of southeast of here, is Mount Rainier, which is called the most dangerous mountain in America because it's hundreds of thousands of years, I guess, or tens of thousands of years overdue for a massive eruption. And it is an active volcano, just dormant. So think St. Helens, but bigger. much, much, much bigger. When the lahars roll down off of Rainier, Tacoma, especially the lower tide flats areas of Tacoma, is toast. I mean, it just is. But it's going to be a beautiful thing to watch, but I'm 75 miles away, so I can walk down the end of my street over there and watch it from a safe distance, I guess. And we're also upwind from it, so should be okay. But we will also be stuck because it's going to shut down all the transportation venues and arteries throughout the state. So we got that to look. Anyway, I was joking with my sister about that. You know, at least for volcano eruptions, we don't get those idiotic sirens, those tornado warning sirens that are almost as scary as the tornado itself, just the way they sound. And again, I've heard them because I kind of grew up in Oklahoma. I spent my summers there, but it wasn't anything that I would really want to go through. So the good news is no visible damage, no injuries at this point. But it was close. I mean, it was their neighborhood, which is a brand new neighborhood just east of the University of Oklahoma. So anyway, spent most of my night worrying about that. But it is also a reminder to me, my good friend Brian Brody and others who are, they like the term prepper. To me, a prepper is somebody from the 1980s who wears his sweater over his shoulders. And I get it. I know that's a preppy, but it's too close. But Brian is really into survival, not into survivalism, but he how to deal with emergencies. And I have other friends that are as well who've encouraged me through the years to make sure that I get things ready and get things squared away. And I think we have. I mean, we have, emergency supplies and the likes of that. So, but it is a reminder, as I'm sure Brian and others would want me to do, to be prepared for anything, because you just don't know, what's going to happen. You don't know where it's coming from. And tornadoes are a great example of that, because they are about, hurricanes, you can predict their course. It's like the game. And within a few hours of it, you know where it's going to hit. Tornadoes, man, you got no clue at all. None. You don't know where it's going to form. You don't know where it's going to touch down. Once it touches down, you have no clue where it's going to go. I mean, it's just random. Earthquakes happen on fault lines. So, if you live on a fault line, you're subject to an earthquake. Tornadoes, man, they just go and go and go. And we actually had one here, thinking it was 2018 at Christmas time. We had a tornado down in Port Orchard, about 10, 15 miles south of here. And like, what the heck? I don't want to live in Oklahoma. I don't want to live down Tornado Alley, Georgia. But we had one there, and we've had a couple of warnings along the way. But there you go. Anyway, happy to tell you my sister, my mother are fine. But it did distract me from the day. So that's kind of where I got off kilter this morning, but we'll try to kick it back in just a little bit here in just a moment. Stay with us. We'll be right back right here on Plausibly Live, The Dave Bowman Show.
Hey there, submarine fans. Let me talk to you about the most exciting thing in currency, the Goldback from Goldback.com. Article 1, Section 10 of the U.S. Constitution says that states are actually legal to create currency as long as they are made of gold and silver. And now there are states doing just that by legalizing and making your own currency using, you got it, gold and silver. The exciting news is the subbet.com is now an authorized dealer to purchase your Goldbacks right on our website. Be sure to email me at eric@thesubbet.com, or you can call me at 720-277-9333. Be sure to check out the Goldbacks on the subbet.com and then get ready to secure your family and future with the power of fractional gold currency. Get your gold back from the Subbet.
Welcome back to I, Dave, on a Monday morning where the world seems to be getting weird, man. I'm telling you. There's some strange stuff happening. Back in 1996, there was a book that came out that I purchased, and it's still on my shelf today. It is one of the most fascinating books I've ever read. There are books that I have read in my lifetime that have provided me with guidance, philosophy, thinking processes, and the likes of that were not intended to be that when they were written. I think specifically of two books, other books, in addition to this one, Yes, Minister and Yes, Prime Minister. Now, these are based on the TV show that was on the BBC. And if you want to know where my theories about how government works comes from, it comes from those two books, which are eerily accurate and were said to have been Margaret Thatcher's favorite TV show and books as well, because there's a lot of truth in satire, and the more you pay attention to it, the more you start realizing, wait a minute, it's funny because it's true. When this book came out in 1996, it was the same kind of thing. Now, in 1996, I was a CEO, and I was struggling in a lot of ways. The Navy had taught me some good management tools, but they were taught to me for people who were obliged to listen to me. I mean, you know, when a first-class petty officer says to a seaman, E3, do this, the E3 doesn't look at the E6 and go, why? And if they do, they get yelled at. Well, you can't do that in the civilian world. You can't do that in the nonprofit world. And so, quite frankly, I was struggling with some things, and I saw this book come out, and I thought, I know it's a joke. I know that the book is satire, but I'm going to buy it and read it anyway because I happen to like the author, who's a guy by the name of Scott Adams, who also wrote the Dilbert cartoon, and the name of the book was The Dogbert Handbook on Management. And I bought it. It's tongue-in-cheek. I mean, it's purely satire. It's clearly satire. But it is also, how do I say this politely, really, really good. And if you can cut through the satire, and if you recognize the fact that there's truth in satire, you very quickly begin to learn that I am the pointy-hair boss, and I need to change that. This is a book that I have used its concepts for years. If you were to see my copy of it, you would see that there are literally highlighted portions where I have gone through with a highlighter and said, this is important. There are notes that I've written in the book. Because, again, it's a satire book, but it is a book that taught me a lot of things about how my management style wasn't up to and touching and how I could improve those things, while at the same time having a pretty good laugh about it. In the book, there's a chapter dedicated to something that he calls the Adams Rule. And of all the things in the book, this is probably the most important one. This is a rule that I have taken with me. If you've listened to this show for any amount of time, you've probably heard me reference it. I don't know that I've ever taken the time to explain it, but the rule is simply called the Adams Rule. And it's very simple. One sentence, one comma, one question mark. For this to be true, take anything that you want. What color is this cup? Is it china white or is it whalebone white? For anything you want to discuss, take this rule. For this to be true, what else has to be true? In other words, if this thing is true, then what else is going to indicate that? What else is going to point to that? What else is to what else has to be true? It's kind of a play on Dan Bongino's Then What? Okay, if this is true, then what? The object here is to think about things. Now, say what you want about what's going on with Dilbert and Scott Adams and everything else today, 30 years later. The object here is to think. And our cultural responses to anything are most definitely not about thinking, are they? They're not about the ideas that we say, well, okay, if this is true, what else has to be true? That doesn't even enter our thought. What enters our thoughts is, we don't like what was said. We're offended by what was said. It's time to react. And we react. We take action without having thought it through completely. But if we take the time to think about things and ask that question, for this to be true, what else has to be true? You're stuck, aren't you? Because if you're thinking about things, you can't react yet because you haven't come to a conclusion about what's going on. You haven't said in your mind, okay, if this is true, what else has to be true? Did I check that? Did I check other things to make sure that what I want to react to is in fact true? How can you react if you're thinking about things? Which, of course, brings us to the simple question, is Scott Adams a racist? He's been canceled. Again, as I said yesterday on WTF, I think this was intentional. I think he was both making a point that cancel culture is out of control, but number two, the guy's been writing this cartoon for more than 30 years. And keep in mind that before that he was writing it without having it sold, and he was working as an engineer. He's tired. He wants to retire. And he knew that if he did this, he would be out of it. That's my thought process. In order for this to be true, what else has to be true? Well, is he old? Is he tired? Does he want to get out of this stuff? All of these things have to be true. Is Scott Adams a racist? I don't know. If he is a racist, what else has to be true in order for Scott Adams to be definitely a racist and to generate our reaction? The Adams rule, for this to be true, what else has to be true, is applicable to all kinds of situations. I mean, I was going to talk about the Ukraine war today. That'll probably be later in the week. There are a lot of assertions made about the Ukraine war. But for them to be true, what else has to be true? What else has to be on the table as factual in order for those assertions to be true? Remember the ghost plane? Things in national interest. If we started asking for this to be true, what else has to be true? I mean, just apply that to East Palestine. Whatever you believe, whatever you think happened in East Palestine, and I wasn't there, and probably neither were you, but in order for what I believe to have happened, what else has to be true? And if you take the time to think about those things and work your way through that, it may change how you see it. Science is a great example. We went to, as I mentioned on WTF yesterday, and as I told you on the page, we went to Canada last week. In fact, the picture behind me is Mount Baker from the MV Coho, the auto walk-on ferry that took us to Victoria, Canada and back. And we saw there an IMAX film. We went to the Royal BC Museum, and we went to the IMAX theater, and they showed us a film about caves, ancient caves, and how ancient caves are teaching scientists about global climate change. And I kept asking, okay, she makes this assertion that this is definitely happening, but for this to have happened, what else must be true? And of course, they never answer those questions. But in my head, I don't have the answers. It might be true, but for it to be true, what else has to be true? And if those other things are not true, because they have to be, is the original assertion for it true? Science, personal relationships. Oh, you want to apply this rule in personal relationships? Oh, how often as human beings do we just react to something that's said? We just assume that we know what the person who said it meant. And we are insulted, offended, hurt, whatever. But if we were to take the time and ask ourselves, if that's true, what else has to be true? If my wife says something that kind of irks me, does that mean she doesn't love me? No. Because in order for that to be true, then other things would have to be true. And They're not. And it's pretty obvious that they're not. Scott Adams wrote that rule in his book in 1996. I would imagine he had that rule for a long time before that. And I have found the Adams rule to be very useful and very beneficial. And I assure you that going forward, whether Scott Adams is a racist, canceled, or not, the Adams rule will continue to make its appearance because, again, I find it very useful and very, very beneficial to me. Take the time right now. Tell the people that matter in your life you love them very much. You'd miss them if they weren't there, so don't pass up those opportunities. You don't want to have that regret. Plausibly Live, I'm Dave Bowman. We'll see you tomorrow for Dave Does History on Bill Mick Live.